Okay, I got Brandon. Well,
That's it. Riley said he just got in.
there's Riley.
And I told January 5th, 2017, Obama told top officials who had been showing up who would stand on the computer to keep the crucial facts from Team Trump. After a Oval Office meeting, Vice President Joe Biden, Intel chief John Brown and Jim Clapper, and National Security Advisor Susan Rice, as well as FBI Director Jim Comey, Deputy Attorney General Simon Yates. From a national security perspective, Rice's memo afterwards said, President Obama said he wants to be sure that as we engage with the incoming team, we are mindful of ascertaining their reasons without sharing information fully as it relates to ethics. This, even also revealed that it's not passage legislation we believe utterly unsubstantiated allegations against him and others took unprecedented steps to unmask U.S. citizens right there whose conversations have been attacked on federal wiretaps or felony. Indeed, the Obama administration went on full scale
No. No, I ain't no haircut. Oh, I just always look perfectly groomed. I can't see. I saw Tammy a minute ago, but I don't see anybody right now. Yeah. All right, man. See you later. Bye.
After 6 here in the Bottom Show. Be right back. Still to come. Today's quarantine number 2. There's a lady who returns twins. Recognized tomorrow. Be right back.
Okay. Okay, super. All right.
Christina? Okay, I didn't know if you left or was here or what. I see you. Do you see me?
Got you. Hey, Judy.
Hey,
Got
can you
You're
hear me?
loud and clear this week.
All right, super duper. We're just waiting.
Just waiting. Waiting on Riley to fill up that Gamecock background.
To do what?
He's got to fill up his Gamecock background, you know.
Oh, okay. I saw him a while ago with the Gamecock go there.
Yeah,
Briefly.
Mark's in a new location this week. He didn't have his big library behind him unless he read all those books and got rid of them.
Here he comes. Maybe. I guess I can pull my chair up a little bit closer so I can see my head.
I am indeed. Yeah. Memorized them all and moved on.
Good deal, man. Do you have an appointment for the Planning Commission tonight?
I wish I could tell you that was knocked out, but I cannot.
Okay. Well, it's probably hard to see people right now because everybody's been so cooped up. Maybe the next few weeks you'll run into somebody that's interested in filling that position. Hey Jay, is your sound working tonight? You good?
I'm on. I
I hear
copy.
you. What you been up to today?
Everything that I'm not supposed to be doing. Nothing that I've had on my schedule. I had to be in traveler's rest most of the day.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's not fun.
Well, we're getting the job wrapped up, but there's complications caused by just complications. It's and we're getting all that wrapped up.
I saw your Gear Street house that just came on the market.
Yeah, we've had several people look at it.
Good. Yes, it looks good. I saw you did those wood countertops we talked about.
Yeah, those actually turned out real nice.
Yeah, they look good.
Yeah, we built those in the shop. They look real nice. Appreciate that.
Yeah, man.
We got some good feedback. Let's see. Yesterday and just now, I saw some feedback come through where,
Is your speech distorted?
Yeah, I thought it looked great, man.
yeah, I'm hoping we'll get we had one offer on it, but they wanted the world. And we just told them, no, we couldn't do that. Hopefully we'll get, I mean, it sounds, this last feedback that I just read, said they were interested. So hopefully we'll get an offer on that
Good.
one.
Good. I hope
Yeah.
so. Yeah, well, it looks really good.
Thank you.
What's the price on it?
129.9.
Oh, okay. What is that, a 2-1?
Do I?
Is that a 2-1? 2-bedroom bath?
Yeah, it's just the standard mill house.
Yeah, okay.
Put somebody on it.
All right, send it to this girl. I'll look it up when we get through here.
Okay. Great. I appreciate that.
Riley,
I
did you just
appreciate
get off
it.
of Muschamp?
Yeah,
What he had to say?
he said we're gonna win them all this year.
Did he?
All right. Way to
Virtual.
go.
He said we're gonna virtually win them all.
Those virtual wins? Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
You see where he hired Des Kitchens, a kid from Furman, as the running backs coach? Looks like Riley's froze up now.
Uh, Okay, well, I hope I won't interrupt the meeting this evening.
Hmm.
Hope I'm in better line.
That made Ed's profile picture smile.
Huh?
I said that. Yeah. I said, as soon as you said that, I looked up and Ed's profile picture was smiling at you. And now he's back on there. So he goes in and out. Mike just smiles at you the whole time with his down there.
We went in a restaurant and ate today.
Oh, good. How was that?
It was good. It was good. It was El Jalusco's or El Jalusco's, whatever it is.
Were there anything different? They have you spaced out or?
Did have it spaced. Uh-huh. Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Like one booth and then they were turned around, no table, and then another booth. And then, you know, one table with some chairs and stuff like that. But they did have it spaced out.
Gotcha.
But the food was good. And it was good to sit down and eat in a restaurant.
Yeah, we really take that for granted, don't we?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Just like going to the grocery store and having food on the shelf.
No
You
doubt.
go when it's vacant, you gotta talk. I even went to Belk's Saturday.
How are they doing?
They were good. They were busy. Had people there, yeah. Of course, it was Mother's Day weekend, so you know people shopping for mom and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But that
Yeah,
was an
we had-
exciting trip too.
Yeah, we had to wrap this up before Mother's Day. That would have set off a panic, you know.
Yeah.
Can you give Wayne a call? He just called me. He said,
Definitely a different experience.
I couldn't get him.
Get him squared away.
Yeah, he said he's like on his laptop and he asked me for the password, gave it to him, but he said it still wasn't letting him in. So I don't know how he's trying to get in.
Hey, Mike,
Yo.
it's good to look at you, man. We can't see you on the live feed.
Cool. Yeah, I got this, that picture looks better than real life, so that's why.
You look really happy in that picture.
I don't think I was getting an award in that picture.
Okay, yeah. That's awesome, man. Good.
All right, we'll be ready to start in just in a minute or two. Jim's working with Wayne. We'll be ready in a minute. All right, so okay. That works. Just give me a couple seconds to get in. Okay. All right. There we go. We got him now. All right, council, I believe we've got everybody and are ready to go. Thank you for joining us this evening. As I sent you a message earlier in the week, I appreciate your willingness and patience as conduct our meetings in this fashion, and hopefully we will be beyond this. We'll talk about the next time that we'll gather a little later on in our meeting tonight. But for this evening, we are ready to begin our regularly scheduled Greer City Council meeting scheduled for May 12th, 2020. And having called the meeting to order, I'd like to ask Councilmember Riley Bettis if he would to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and then an invocation for council.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and
Justice for all.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we trust that you are good and do good. Teach us to be your faithful people in this time of global crisis. Help us to follow the footsteps of your faithful shepherd, Jesus, who laid down his life for the sake of love. Glorify his name as you equip us with everything needed to do your will. Amen.
Thank you, sir. Council, we set aside a time for public forum at the beginning of our meetings. Ms. Duncan, do we have anyone to appear in public forum this evening?
No, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. With that, then we'll move to the minutes from our council meeting from April the 28th. I'll entertain a motion that they be received.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any items of note from the clerk? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
No.
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Thank you. With that, then, we will move to the administrator's report. Mr. Driggers?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Obviously, I say obviously, that most of what we have been dealing with here at City Hall has been more specific to our responses to COVID-19, how it's affected our employees, our workspaces, and our adherence and compliance with orders coming from the governor's office. A couple of things that I do want to bring you, make you aware of, bring you up to speed on, is I guess a bit of a refresher. We know that back on May 4th is when the governor lifted the home work order, and that set into motion for us certain ability to start getting a few things opened up and making plans for us to start moving forward. At that time, he also provided for limited outdoor dining. As we are all aware, throughout the state, local law enforcement as well has a responsibility of assisting with making sure that compliance is in place with those things that are actually within orders of the governor's office. And that has gone very, very well for us. We have not had any issues whatsoever. We've had a couple of compliance issues, very, very small matters that once we've been able to have a conversation with the proprietors of those businesses, they've quickly been able to make sure that they're getting the distancing and those things that has been requested. But no issues or concerns for us for compliance issues. May 6th, we then were able to immediately start moving forward with what we called phase 1 of the opening of our parks and recreation facilities. We had started preparing well before that date in a 5-phase process of getting things reopened. Phase one, I did send you the information on that, identifying those larger community parks and what we were doing there. But that recommended some of our, the opening of some of our parks, offering our residents access to our green space and trail areas. We were able to do that on a staggered approach. Based on certain amenities that we had within each of those parks is how we helped identify those as well. Being able to, again, be able to the best of our ability, provide for social distancing, physical distancing in those facilities. So Greer City Park, Center for the Arts Park, Century Park, Veterans Park, Victor Park Walking Trails, and the Golf and Country Club, which had remained open, all of those facilities to at least some limited capacity were able to be open on May the 6th. On the following Monday, yesterday, we were able to move into phase two of some of those opening. That allowed us to get our tennis courts and our pickleball courts reopened. And so that was very helpful for us. We were starting to get inquiries about how that would take place. We're hoping that we're going to be able to get some additional fields open later this week. We're trying to manage those sites now, getting signage that may be necessary in those areas. Again, mainly making folks aware of the recommendations relative to social distancing, also making sure that we have hand washing stations, hand sanitizing areas provided for in those facilities as well. But some of those will include Turner Fields, both of the Turner Fields, Stevens Ball Field, and then also some of our neighborhood parks. We're not recommending at this time that we open children's playground equipment. And so we're continuing to keep those areas blocked off, but they will be opening soon as well. It will provide some additional information to you. We'll be sending this out to you, but we do have a phase 3, phase 4, and phase 5. Phase 3 would really be more early to mid-June, taking us more then from mid to late June in phase 4 and phase 5 in early to mid-July. So you can see that there's a very intentional, very methodical process of getting those facilities reopened, primarily for us looking for, to the best of our ability, the safety of our visitors to each of those facilities. One of the main things that we want to make sure is that we're providing information to our visitors of our park about things that they can do or that they may do relative to safety in those facilities. We're not looking at those are mandates or requirements. We're trying to make sure that folks have the information that they need to make good decisions as they re-enter into those public spaces and those public facilities. Also, as we're moving forward with that at this time, we are also being affected by how our employees are impacted. And so beginning next Monday, May 18th, we are returning all of our operations to regular operating schedules. We've had some various alternative schedules, some departments opening earlier, later, bringing people in at different times. We'll evaluate how that's going to work for us as we move forward. But at this point, we're asking everyone to resume their normal schedules beginning on the 18th. We will also cease our work at home program that we've had in place for various employees. We will have some special exceptions. We've already had some requests for special exceptions, primarily relative to childcare, because we're recognizing that most childcare facilities are indicating that they intend to open beginning June 1st. And so we are working with a couple of our employees that may need to trade off with a spouse or with another childcare provider. And so we're doing that on an individual basis and getting them prepared for that. Our recycling center will be opening on May 18th as well. So next Monday, we will fully reopen the recycling center. We're hoping that in that area, it's outside, it's distanced by nature as well. So we're hoping that visitors to the recycling center will take precautionary measures as they deem necessary. It isn't mandatory that anyone would have to go to a recycling center. We'll be able to collect recyclings at curbside as we have been able to do previously. And so if a person chooses to go to the recycling center, we do want to have it open. We want to have it sanitized and clean to the best of our ability, working with our contractor there, Ace Environmental, on that site. But the gates will be reopened Monday, the 18th. We're looking to reopen our lobbies to all of our public facilities, City Hall, police and courts, the OC, the fire department. Fire department may be an exception for us because of the very nature of the work that those folks are having and the low number of walk-ins that we would get in that lobby. But for most of our facilities, we do think that we'll be able to get those opened on May 25th. I originally had hoped to do that a week earlier, but I believe that it's in the best interest for our employees that we've got some that are coming in an environment that they haven't been used to in the last couple of months. And so we want to get those folks reintroduced into the workplace. We want to make sure that they're comfortable and that we're providing necessary sanitation instruction on how we'll be operating our facilities. We do not intend, unless council were to give us some other direction, it is not our intent to require masks either by our employees or by the public when they enter our facilities. But we do intend to have those items available for our staff if they so choose to wear a mask, or if a visitor to our facility chooses that they would like to have one on when they arrive, we will have those available as well. We've been planning for, and we believe that the supply that's necessary for that will be able to accommodate that. Obviously, word of the day for us, as it has been everywhere, is for us to continue to promote social distancing and standards, specifically in our public facilities. There are some components of the governor's executive orders that still restrict events within public spaces. And so we're waiting for those restrictions to be lifted. Once those are lifted, we'll then be in a position of being able to notify customers who have scheduled for rentals in our facilities that how we can accommodate getting them back in to those spaces as well. As the mayor shared with you earlier, we are calling a special called meeting. The mayor has called a special called meeting for next Tuesday, May the 19th. The purpose of that meeting will be an executive session. There will be no other business conducted in that meeting, but that will be an on-site meeting here at City Hall. You will be in a bit of a different environment in Hall A, relative to your seating and spacing, but we will be able to do that complete meeting here at City Hall 1 week from tonight on the 19th. If there are any issues or concerns that you have coming out of that meeting, we certainly could address those at that point. But prior to your next meeting on May the 26th, our emergency declaration will have expired. And so council will no longer have the ability to cast votes electronically. So it will be necessary for that meeting to be conducted in a public environment. But again, we will be working to make sure that we're providing distancing in that area that gives you the comfort level that you need, as well as the public as they would come in for public portions of that meeting. Again, you will only be in executive session on the 19th, so there will be no public that would be allowed into that meeting because you'll go straight into executive session. You'll come out of executive session, and we're not anticipating any action to be taken. So you should be good for that. But we will be able to accommodate both the general public as well as you when you reconvene for your May 26th regular council meeting. Again, we're continuing to work through all of scheduled rentals in our event center as we go forward, looking for clarification from the governor's office on that. But we are imposing cleaning protocols that we will have in place for those, and then advising users of our facility the recommendations that are coming from the governor. As I stated earlier, our emergency order expires 61 days from the day that it was enacted. And so it will be actually expiring, I believe that 61st day is on Sunday, the 24th. We were double checking that, but it expired right before your next meeting. There will be some items in executive session that we would like to talk with you more specifically about this evening, and some advice from our city attorney relative to how we're handling things going forward without that emergency declaration. Glad to answer any questions that you may have relative to any of that or any other operational issues that we have, but that's where most of our time and energy has been spent in managing the COVID-19 situation and getting our facilities as we've operated over the last couple of months. Very, very glad to advise you and make you aware that through the use of our Track-It system here at City Hall, for permitting, everything that we do to keep the business of the city going forward. From that respect, that has gone extremely well for us. It's been a challenge for some contractors that have been out there, but we've been able to work with them to make sure that we're continuing to do business and address their needs going forward. Most of our employees are classified as essential personnel, so there's been no change of schedules or operational alterations relative to police and fire, and that's continuing to go forward as well. So we ramped into this, and we will ramp out of it as we move forward. Our position on the staff level has been that we are adhering to the requirements, to the orders of the governor's office. And as those are being lifted, we're able to lift ours as well. Certainly available to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Council, any questions?
Yes, Ed, what are you and staff basing, and we'll just talk about parks, what are you basing the opening, those phases you just mentioned, what is that based on?
It's primarily based on the ability to provide for that separation that's being recommended. At this point, we don't believe that it's advisable to put people into an environment that they would believe that we are sanitizing. And if we don't have that equipment in place at this point, we don't think it's appropriate that we do that. So a lot of it is based on us being able to get appropriate equipment. For example, we are purchasing hand wash stations very similar to what you would see out at special events or festivals, so that there are different places within our parks that you can do hand washing with soap and water. And so we're waiting for that equipment to arrive. And as soon as that helps us phase that part of it in as well. Bathrooms, water fountains, those types of things. We understand that there can be debate relative to recommendations that are coming either through the federal level or through the state level. To this point, what we've tried to do is to comply with that which are orders, and ease us in as quickly as we can for all of the other park facilities. At this point, we can't assure any individual that a piece of playground equipment is sanitized. We just don't have the ability to do that with the rapid number of folks that are coming or would be coming into those facilities.
Well, okay. Is the state, county, or federal government, are they providing us, when they came out with their regulations, have they provided any scientific information to say, this is why we're doing this. And now we are at a point where we're going to remove those restrictions, and this is why.
Well, Mr. Airwood, let me say that I'm in no position to debate the scientific evidence.
No, I'm not.
Um,
And I'm just saying, no. I'm just asking, are we getting any information from anyone besides, well, we think, if you're thinking something, why do you think that way?
Yes, there are CDC guidelines for the reopening of public parks and facilities. And so we are using that information along with best practices by reaching out to our cohorts around the state. And so we're looking at every other city that operates facilities. We're not looking at it on county levels. We're looking at it from a municipal perspective. We're not choosing to do something because someone else did, and we're choosing not to. We're simply making sure that we have as much information as we can about safely opening those facilities. We recognize that at any point, council could intervene and instruct us to do things differently. We're at this point simply trying to provide recommendations and guidelines, primarily that which is coming from CDC and being recommended by our governor's office in South Carolina.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, does any of these recommendations coming from the CDC and especially the state level, are they backed up with any information? Because I would, of course, you want to open up everything you can as soon as possible. But on the other hand, you're doing this, is it just based on, I feel it's time, or is there some sort of scientific information that backs the opening up?
It's scientific. I do not know the references that CDC uses in making their recommendations. We're using their recommendation as our guideline.
I got you, but
I mean, that's, yeah.
No other advice or information is coming from the state level.
No more than what you see when the governor does a press conference as well. And most of those have really not been addressed with public facilities as much as they have been with private facilities.
Right.
The exception to that being lakes and boat ramps and those types of things, which did not apply to us.
Jay, I think there has been as well sort of an overlapping effort of common sense in some of this. I do know that in the national parks, the trails that are not wide enough for people to pass each other at a recommended social distancing have not been opened yet. And I know there are some of the other parks, particularly state parks, where there are limited gathering areas, that those areas are still being restricted. So in addition to whatever scientific information is being offered by the CDC and DHEC, I think those people that have jurisdiction over those parks have also applied some rules that I think are just, they feel like are in the best interest of those folks that are going to be using the facilities.
And I understand that. I just, you hate to make, we hate to make decisions that are just based on emotion or what we think. We want to be as close to right as we can. And so that's where I was trying. It's and this is more at our state level, that we're not, they don't put out a lot of statistics that says this is why we're doing this, or this is what our medical experts are saying. And I think that's, I don't know. I think maybe at some point we should, maybe if we have questions, reach out to the hospital systems that's located in the city and just, hey, what do you think?
Yeah, and we are doing that. I do a weekly, I have a weekly teleconference call with our hospital system that they're giving us advice based on their census in the hospital. They're giving us information about the number of cases that they're seeing. And we have to take that with caution because we know that we're being advised at the federal level and the state level that as we open more things, that the number of cases will increase. Now that's what we're being told. But I can know that I can also go to any amount of sources out there, and I can read just as many stories that tell me that's not the case. And
You know,
so
like our neighbors below us, Georgia,
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it's a really difficult situation for us. And so we're, as the mayor said, we're trying to use some common sense, using our experience, recognizing that we can't do it all at one time. But I can also make you aware as policymakers for the city, for you folks, someone reaches out to you and says, hey, I think you ought to get the tennis courts open, and I think you need to do it right away. I can tell you, we opened the tennis courts and my phone rings off the hook of what idiot said, open the tennis courts. I mean, there are so many opinions out there as to what we should or should not be doing. We're not a county health department. We're not in the health business. And so we're trying to take that advice in a chain of command order, that we really are looking at the reports that are coming daily from Spartanburg County and Greenville County. We read those every single day. We're using best management practices to our colleagues around the state, and we're taking the direction of our governor's office on those things that we are told that we can or cannot do. So example, as of right now, we cannot allow a public event in a public facility that has more than 3 or more people. That order is still in place. And so we have a number of people that are looking to use our facilities that we're having to say, we anticipate that will be lifted, but it isn't lifted yet.
I understand.
And yeah. And so sometimes, Mr. Airwood, what we believe we're going to do in the morning changes because there's a press conference in the afternoon and we have to change our direction as a result of it. That's the difficulty of it. And we recognize at the staff level, we absolutely recognize that at any point, as a matter of policy, our mayor and council may choose to give us a direction contrary to what we may be recommending that we do. And we understand that, and we are open to that. We're just trying to do it intentional and methodical.
Do we, like, there's a certain segment of the population that don't believe none of this, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm getting emails where they say they ain't following nothing, you know what I'm saying? So what happens if those people show up and is there the ability to make them leave or to make them follow the guidelines?
It is our position. Our park staff assist with telling people what the guidelines are. Our police department assists with letting people be aware of what the guidelines are. We, to our very fortunate, we have not had anyone that has refused to follow the guidelines in our public facilities. And at this point, we're talking parks. Before this meeting started, I sent a text over to Ms. Cunningham that said, we've got a pickup soccer game taking place on the lawn at City Hall. We should not be doing that. That is personal contact that's happening there in the park. The parks are not open for that type of activity at this point. One of our staff members stopped by, talked with the folks that were down there. They moved on. And so we're handling it in as a civil way as we can. We are not making arrests. We are not writing tickets. But if there is a clear violation of the governor's order, we do have the authority to do that. We've just not been put in a position that we've needed to do that.
Because the reason I said that, because I'm getting a lot of emails. I don't know if you've seen them emails from the people who say they ain't, they ain't following none of that.
Yeah, I'm getting those.
And I don't
yes,
know
sir.
where that stuff coming from. No way, but to me, that's what they saying. You can't do what you're doing, and we ain't following it. So
Right.
my thing was, if those people, where to organize and where to show up.
Yeah, we are very diligently trying to be understanding, and we're trying to recognize that there are different opinions on both sides of this issue. And so in our workplace, please know that I have a huge responsibility in providing for the safety and welfare of our employees in our facilities. And that may be different than what we do outside in our public parks. And there's a fine line there because they're both public, but we're an employer as well.
Yeah.
And so we're listening to our employees. And when we have an employee that for a legitimate reason isn't comfortable being exposed to someone that may not be taking certain precautions, we're trying really, really hard to accommodate that. And we're doing that. While we did it on a larger scale, citywide and with our departments, we're now doing that moving forward into next week, doing that on a case-by-case basis. We have great respect for our employees and their concerns for their personal health, safety, and well-being. And that's why I felt that it was necessary to allow those folks to get back into our operations, and we more methodically, intentionally start reintroducing outside people into those environments. But a lot of our employees work in office environments that they never have public contact. And so we're trying to be very, very sensitive to that. To date, I think we have been, but we know that there are opinions in our community that may be contrary to what we're trying to do. And so when the governor's office says these are recommendations, we are applying those as recommendations. The governor's office says this is an order, we apply it as an order.
Mr. Griffin, when some of the demonstrations started several weeks ago, I did meet with Mr. Driggers, and we had a discussion about that. We realized that we want to be respectful of those different opinions in our community. We know they exist, and we want to be respectful of that. But I did ask that Mr. Driggers meet with our police chief and formulate a plan that in the case that we did have an instance where we had a planned demonstration of some kind, or even an ad hoc demonstration, that not only would our police department be prepared, but our staff be prepared. And that was discussed at a recent staff meeting. So I think we're all on the same page about that.
Okay.
I think Ed, you said it, the two words you said, and they're the same words. It's one side has an opinion, the other side has an opinion. And I think what I was trying to get to is that if we make a decision one way or the other, we need to have that decision backed up by fact, because
Yes.
just like we've got two groups out there, and if we do one thing and one group doesn't like it, and then they take some sort of action, we need to be able to defend our actions. So
yes, sir, I absolutely agree.
Going with all of that.
Absolutely. And so I hope that I can reassure you and all of council in that there is no time in this process that we flip a coin. We never go, oh, we could do one or we could do the other. When we make a decision, we make that decision based on information that we have. And even if someone disagrees with that decision, we have a basis to defend why we did it.
Good.
And we respect that someone can disagree, but we have a reason for what we do and when we do it.
Okay, good.
Yes, yes, sir.
All right. Others, any questions, follow up on any of that before we move on? If not, we're going to move to appointments of boards and commissions. I have not had conversation with staff or any additional conversation with staff in regards to the Board of Architectural Review. We will consider that at a later meeting. And Mr. Hopper and I have been in communication about a candidate for the Planning Commission for District 3. That seat remains unfilled at this point in time, but I can assure you it is not for a lack of trying, and I think that hopefully by our next meeting or June, that position will be filled. Any new information, Mr. Hopper, since we talked?
No, Mr. Mayor, you summed it up well.
Okay, thank you. We will move on then to items of old business. The first of which is the second and final reading of ordinance number 16-2020. This is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by Chester and Margaret Smith located at 203 East Fairview Avenue from RM residential multifamily to DRD. Mr. McMahon, any new or additional information in that regard this evening?
No, sir.
This comes to us with no new or additional information. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Question? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, the second item before us this evening is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by Demetrius Chalkas located at 701 West Poinsett Street from C2 to DRD. Mr. McMahon, any new or additional information in that regard, sir?
No, sir.
Council comes to second and final reading. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So
So
moved.
moved. I'll second.
Mr. Griffin made the motion, Mr. Bettis seconds. Any discussion in that regard? Questions? Comments? Hearing none, Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, item C, which is the third item before us, is second and final reading of ordinance number 18-2020, an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by Michael Bruce located on Highway 14 North from R7.5 to DRD. Mr. McMahon, any new or additional information in that regard, sir?
No, sir.
I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
So,
Mr. Bettis made the motion, is that correct? No?
No.
Okay. Who made the motion?
Dumas.
second.
Okay, Mr. Dumas makes the motion and Mr. Arrowood seconds.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Any questions in that regard? Comments?
I believe this parcel of land was annexed in years ago, before most of us were on council, and this is part of the expansion that we've seen over the many years. I believe this is one of the very first pieces that were done as far as large parcels and annexations.
You're correct in intent there. Yes, sir. Indeed. Others? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council will move to the second and final reading of ordinance number 19-2020. This is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned of Pandion Properties LLC located at 306 West Poinsett Street from DRD to OD. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Bettis and a second from Ms. Albert. Floor is open for discussion. Comments? Questions? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council will move to the second and final reading of ordinance number 20-2020. An ordinance to change the zoning classification of properties owned by Culberson Land Company, West C. Culberson, located at 606 and 610 North Main Street from C2 to C3. Mr. McMahon, any new or additional information in that regard?
No, sir.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to receive ordinance number 20-2020.
So move.
Mr. Griffin makes the motion.
Second.
Mr. Arrowood seconds. Floor is open for discussion. Questions or comments?
The developer owner that spoke to us last time, is his plan still the same?
Yes, sir. We haven't heard anything otherwise to that effect.
Others? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, the last item of old business is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by Curtis C. Hip located at Victor Avenue from RM1 to DRD. This comes to you as ordinance number 21-2020. Mr. McMahon, any new or additional information in regards to ordinance number 21-2020?
No, sir.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So move.
Second.
Mr. Arrowood makes the motion. Mr. Bettis seconds. Floor is open for discussion. Questions?
Brandon, the siding that they intend to use, I know in their description, they listed all the sidings, but if they use one, that makes them have to use, there has to be two types. Is that correct? Of
Yes,
sidings?
sir. Yes, sir. They have to use two material types. They can do siding and then stone or some other form.
Others? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, we only have one item in new business this evening. It is the first reading of ordinance 22-2020. This is an ordinance to amend the City of Greer zoning ordinance by amending Article 5 zoning district regulations, section 18, DT, which is downtown overlay district. Mr. McMahon, you have information in that regard, sir?
Yes, sir. We are requesting to add a subsection 4.1 as site development. Within that subsection, you will see, let me see if I can get the PowerPoint to pull up. Within that subsection, we have that we are requesting that all new construction be required to install an exterior sidewalk up to 8 feet in width. That will be determined by staff just on availability of space and if it's actually a doable site to have that. Currently in the downtown overlay, we do not require parking for any development. We are requesting to add at least 1 parking space per unit in our downtown district. Commercial businesses will remain the same. They are not required to provide parking. And in subsection 5.2, we are just kind of cleaning that up a little bit from what it was. Previously, before it said zoning coordinator, we're changing that to administrator just to keep it the flow with what other parts of the zoning ordinance have reflected. And we are also requesting to remove the density cap and for that section. Basically right now, the density is allowed at 15 units per acre for downtown, and with potential development, we just figure that's kind of a low density for our downtown area. The height requirement will still remain, so they will just have to fit that density within that height requirement. That's all the information that I have. This did go to Planning Commission, and they did make a recommendation of approval.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Hopper makes the motion, Mr. Airwood makes the second. Floor is open for discussion or questions of Mr. McMahon.
Mr. McMahon, council as well, I saw that Brandon was not able to share his screen. Jim Ridgel will need to give him permission to be able to do that. If the slides that he has would be a benefit for you during this discussion, we will make that happen at this point. But Brandon, I realized very quickly that's why you weren't able to get it pulled up.
Okay, yes, sir.
Brandon, when you are talking about all new construction, define new construction.
So that's going to be where if they were to tear down a building, completely tear it down, or if they find some vacant land, that's going to be new construction. Interior upfits for businesses within the downtown area or within the overlay, we're not going to consider that new site development.
Okay, so any renovation of a building or the upfit or the upfit of the exterior would not put them into that category of maybe having to do an 8-foot sidewalk.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, and what's the driving force behind wanting to have up to 8-foot sidewalks?
We were basing that off of the master plan that was passed by council. Within that plan, they laid out how they wanted the downtown sidewalks to look with pedestrian access, with some landscaping, and then kind of with that parking area. So typically most of our our sidewalks downtown that are along state roads, they're typically 5 feet. And that's just, we're asking for up to 8 feet. It depends on site layout. If they're not able to get that, that's something we would not require.
The requirement for 1 spot per residential unit, does that, that's for off-street parking. Are they allowed to take in public parking in their count of parking spaces?
So currently we don't require any parking downtown, even for residential. With this section, they would be required to provide that parking. They would not be able to count public parking.
So they wouldn't be, although it talks about off-street parking, so they aren't allowed to count the parking lots that we have as off-street.
Correct. This would be a requirement for residential to provide that parking. With some of the businesses or some of the developers we've dealt with in the past that have come and talked about projects, they typically try to impose 1.5 to 1.7 parking spaces per unit. So we felt that providing that 1 would also allow for patrons to be able to still have parking in our public areas.
Well, what if you have mixed use? You have a second floor that's residential, first floor is retail. How does that play out?
Just the residential will be required to have the parking. The retail would not. It would be up to them to kind of work that out if people were parking within their private parking area.
So we have a building on Trade Street that goes away completely. Developer, builder, somebody buys it and it's mixed use. So where is that one space going?
They may have to change their layout. A lot of our businesses on Trade have alleyway space, and their properties, some do go to the extent where it hits the alleyway. Some of the other ones, they could possibly reduce that size and have a parking on the rear.
I think that might be an issue.
Brandon, is there an ability for special exception?
We don't have that in there, but that's something we could add to that.
I think where Mr. Airwood's going with that's very valid. There could be a circumstance that the ability to get a single space in that urban environment just would not, it can't be accommodated. And it would seem reasonable that there needs to be some provision that a special exception could be made.
I would tend to agree, because I'm thinking about those existing residential units that we've got now on the second floor. And when I typically park in the parking lot, the public parking lot there behind Smith and James and some of those other buildings. And, you know, when I go to my car between 5 and 6 o'clock, there is more than adequate space for a resident to pull in there and park overnight and then leave the next morning. I don't know that it's going to be entirely feasible for every one of those to have a dedicated space. So I think we need to have some process or procedure in place that would accommodate in some regard the use of a public parking space.
Yeah.
I apologize for that. They could request a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals. That is completely my bad. Special exception threw me for a second, but they could ask for a variance since it is a number. So they could ask for that reduction in parking through a variance request.
But that's kind of, I don't want to say it's like tossing a coin in the air, but it is additional expense for somebody to do that, correct? Because they have to go and pay the fees and then wait the time to get on the calendar, that kind of thing, right?
That's correct. But we do the same thing with special exceptions.
Okay, well, unless things have changed, and I know that the number of folks coming into downtown, it has changed. But if we go back to a study that Reno's group did, and they did it all times of the day, times of the year, and they basically said we've got plenty of parking, and that didn't include the new parking areas that we've redone, and of course it didn't include the parking garage that we're going to construct. You know, if issues with residential parking starts to happen, I think that, well, I think there should be a better solution to the off-street requirement, because in a lot of places that just is not going to happen. To me, it's a deterrent to development, especially when we have a lot of public parking where we could even lease a space to someone if we so chose.
I believe if they were to lease a space from the parking garage, we would count that towards their parking count.
Oh, well, what about the other parking lots throughout downtown?
The public parking lots? If that's council's desire, staff will definitely make those changes.
I wonder, is it possible that we would consider that for a minimum number of units? Let's say it's a single dwelling, one car. It's 2 units, 2 cars, 3 units, 3 cars. I mean, could it be that this would be that there's no requirement that public parking could be used for 5 or less? Anything greater than that would be considered that accommodation needs to be made for that parking. Because I do think we have a number of spaces in our downtown area where single units could be constructed above, second floors in some of our downtown buildings, those types of things. There's a big difference between someone building 3 units on a second floor than it is someone building, 185 units, 1 street away.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the whole idea that urban living comes with this idea that you may or may not have your own parking space. I mean, I don't know that in every case that's going to be something that's going to be guaranteed, at least not in those smaller developments. Now I can see where, we wouldn't want people using, a parking place on Trade Street, but even that's difficult to enforce because we've got merchants that park their own cars right in front of their own stores and let it sit there all day long. So, I have some real hesitation about the way the parking portion of this is right now. I think we may want to revisit that in some regard.
Yes, sir.
This is first reading. We can proceed with first reading. We can, we could amend at this point. We could ask to hold over. We've got numerous options before us. Who made the motion on this, Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Hopper.
Mr. Hopper, you're a bit in the catbird seat here on this. Depending on your comfort level, if you're good at doing first reading, we can proceed with the expectation that we may have something different for second, or we could amend the motion and hold it over and give staff time to review this, whatever your pleasure is, sir.
What is the rest of council? Any input from anyone else's preferences?
I think at this point that the majority of the ordinance seems to be agreeable to council. I think Mr. McMahon understands that there are some concerns about the parking. I don't have a reservation about first reading. If there are some of us that do object, I don't know that it would overrule the ordinance. So if we want to go ahead with the ordinance, we'll take that vote and expect that our concerns have been heard this evening.
I'm fine with moving on it, understanding that there's some things potentially to revisit and tweak.
Okay.
Moving forward.
Okay. Any further comments or questions in this regard?
Brandon, I had a quick question on that. Now, what was the intent of this again?
Yes, sir. As we've started to get some developers coming to the area looking for property around downtown, looking to do rather large projects, we just felt at this point, if you have a very large project, they may have 2 to 3 bedrooms, and we are not requiring any parking, that it could potentially eat up all of our public parking, not allowing patrons to come downtown on the weekends and stuff like that when most people are at home. So that was kind of, and talking with developers that do downtown type apartments in Greenville and other areas in Charlotte area, they typically say between 1.5, 1.7 parking spaces per unit is what they go with. So we felt that 1 was a safer option. So that would give them a little more flexibility.
Well, to Mr. Dreger's point, that may be something that we want to consider. If there are, more than half a dozen in a building, then that may be necessary to have designated parking spaces for the people that are wanting to do, 1 or 2 or 3 units above a building, or, in an area that may not be necessary. But I can obviously see the need for, if somebody's going to build 200 apartments somewhere, to have adequate parking for it. I wouldn't disagree with that a bit.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mayor. Maybe, instead of, will provide, may be required to provide. And that would be a decision based on the number. I mean, that's one way to address it. Staff may have a much better way to address it. I just think when we are saying you have to do that right off the bat, there are potential issues, and that's not good legislation if you know going into it. I believe there'd be issues.
And then what you may want to do is to check back in with those other cities that you talked with and just see where the rub started. You know, if it was with more than 2 units or 3 units or 5 units, or if it was 100 units where they started seeing issues and having concerns and needed to shift and change their ordinance. I mean, that may be a good place to start.
Yes, sir. And talking with some of the developers, it did come down to financing also, that sometimes they were not able to get financing without providing some type of parking.
I mean, that was something that the lender required.
So we have seen that on projects where the lender may have specific requirements that they're looking for within their development. And that's something that they will email us and ask for a verification letter to make sure they meet the zoning ordinance. And we have to verify that they meet all of the ordinance. And just talking with some recently about all this, they have said typically for them to get full financing, they have to provide some type of parking.
Well, how does that involve us in our legislation?
If they exceed our ordinance, I don't see that would be an issue.
Right.
No, we just have to confirm compliance. I mean,
Right.
for the bank letter, it's just saying that before they issue a loan, the bank just wants to know that we're not going to stop construction because of a zoning issue.
Right.
All right,
We are certainly comfortable that if you chose to table this, it would give us an opportunity to do some rewrite. I think we understand what we're hearing, and we can certainly do that. Or you could proceed with first reading, and we would offer an amendment on second reading going forward. Brandon and Ashley, I don't think that it's necessarily timely for us right now. We don't have a project in the wings that this is going to apply to. So we are very comfortable to go in either direction as council would direct.
I'm comfortable with the bulk of the rest of the ordinance. I like the idea of the possibility of 8-foot sidewalks. I could see where even if you had 5 foot on either side, that if if it was going to be a business that wanted some sort of outdoor dining or space out front, that that the building could be made to accommodate the wider sidewalks. And even in places where we didn't have sidewalks, that it seems to me that 5, 6, 7, 8 foot sidewalks are even appropriate. And the density is, I think, something that's appropriate moving forward as we look at higher structures as well. I'm not comfortable with the parking piece of it though. Council, is it suitable with you that we proceed with the first reading with the amendment to come, expectation of an amendment on the second?
Good for me.
I think we're at that point.
Yes.
Okay, any additional information that's necessary or comments you'd like to make? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Thank you, staff. We appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Council, that concludes our business meeting for this evening. We have 2 items to consider in executive session. I will ask that someone make a motion that we go into executive session.
So moved.
Hang on, I got to make the motion.
Oh, that's right. You got it. Weird stuff.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to enter into executive session to discuss a personnel matter pertaining to the administration department as allowed by state statute, section 30-470A1. And also make a motion to enter into executive session to discuss a legal matter as allowed by state statute, section 30-4-70A2.
Comes as a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Ms. Albert?
It's like her screen's frozen.
Oh, Judy.
Ms. Albert?
Hmm.
I'm unmuted. Yes.
Yes, there you go. Thank you.
Mayor Danner.
Yes.
As we're preparing to transition, Mr. Ridgel, I need you to give me host access because I have items to share on the screen with council in executive session. So I need host ability.
Should have that now, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, so from a time standpoint, are we gonna time out if we're? No. No, we're good? Okay. All right, thank you.
Are we still live on YouTube?
But we can go, once we need to go. Okay. There's no.
It says that we are.
Looks like it.
Okay.
It says, look, beside it says recording paused.
Okay.